wanted to talk to you about was, I noticed something in your paintings when you were talking about, a football conflict, the accident. There seems to be a through line of catastrophe.
Well, putting it in very, very simple terms is that I'm attracted to that not because of it being a catastrophe, but the formal arrangement that occurs when two cars crashes is much more interesting than two cars parked together on the curb, because it creates a plastic, it creates a visual excitement.
Okay.
So I don't really have any specific connection to catastrophes, as if I enjoy a catastrophe in and of itself.
Right.
Because it doesn't. All that matters to me is what makes a painting.
Okay. Let me put it a different way then, because I'm trying to see if my perception is way off or not. It seems to be a through line of some sort of, not violence, but some sort of collusion.
It's funny because
is that cathartic? Is that
the writer? I don't know if you read or even got that book. Liebenstein, his name is. He wrote a book on my work. Well, it's also a biography, and he's an art critic and a historian and one of the most intelligent person that I ever met. And he's been following my work for about 30 years. He's French, he lives in Paris. And he claims also to see this kind of underlying kind of violence, even in the because I was going to bring this up with you just now and say, well, what about the superrealist period where those liners were in a smooth ocean, there wasn't a wind, there was not a wave out of place, and he thought that somehow behind it there was a seething something.
Storm.
Yeah, and in fact, metaphysically speaking, there was a storm later on when I felt displaced out of the superrealist, photorealist, because at the end of the year there were 100 painters doing it.
Right.
And I thought that it was something that had been taken away from me.
Okay.
I don't have any conscious feeling that when I'm painting, a car crash, about the car crash idea itself. What I'm looking at is one tone against another tone.
Sure.
Against another tone. The very practical aspect of doing it. And the feeling, whatever that is, comes in without me participating in it. Why don't you get that chair over there, and then you can be higher than us, which would be so thrilling. Put you on a pedestal. You like that, don't you? There's a great story about Mallarmé and Degas. Mallarmé was a 19th century symbolist poet. And they were great pals, Degas and Mallarmé. And after 20 years, Degas once said to Mallarmé, he said, Mallarmé, I also write poetry. And I've been writing poetry for 20 years, as long as we've known each other. And I have a devil of a time expressing my feelings. Would you mind reading them? So Mallarmé read them, and when they got back together, he said to him, Degas, poetry is not made with feelings, it's made with words. Painting is made with paint.
That's right.
Not with these literary interpretations that people see things in terms of,
Right.
you know, from a literary point of view.
But you can.
But I can't deny that there's a very strong
But if
subject matter.
if there's a common theme or common action, right, and the common action seems to travel from painting to painting, then one could deduce that, intentional or not, it can be present.
Yes. Well, if an artist is in the world, so to speak, linked, and is connected to what's going on, then some of that would surely be reflected in what he does. Although that argument can be destroyed because you can point to artists such as Bryce Malcolm.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you know his
I do.
work, which is completely abstract
Right.
and incredibly beautiful. And it's sort of a beauty thing in and of itself. And it does all the things that, for me, a painting should do. Yet Bryce will paint one of those abstract paintings mourning for the death of a friend. But he doesn't need to paint a literal, figurative painting.
Right.
He paints this completely abstract painting, and he'll call it
Okay.
The Mourning of a Friend, you know. Are you familiar with Barnett Newman?
Yes.
He's a major, big major painter from the 50s and 60s and 70s, actually. He painted these huge, giant paintings with one color and with a stripe down one end. And he would call that, I got to know him, he became a mentor for me. And he was very involved with the idea of painting as if he was the first artist. Mm-hmm. So he had a whole shebang, you know, a whole philosophy, a whole thing that went with it. And it was very, very grandiose. For example, somebody once said to him, well, you familiar with Malevich? He's a Russian constructivist. He invented something called suprematism. His famous painting in the modern is a white square on a white ground. And that was painted over 100 years ago. Anyway, so somebody said, well, what about Malevich? And he drew himself up and he said, my dialogue is with Michelangelo. You know, he didn't fuck around. He just had this whole thing going. And he was painting pictures that the man in the street would say was rubbish.
Right.
You know. But the connoisseurs thought that was one of the greatest statements that you could possibly make in painting.
But often when an artist expands into a different genre of paint, and it's hard.
He came out of a sort of a tradition
Okay.
of a certain kind, iconic art. He's very Jewish. He was very involved with the synagogue, you know, and that's a very abstract kind of process of thinking. You know, they don't have crucifixes and anything like that.
Right.
You know. So really, each artist can make up quite a wonderful story for themselves.